very nice to be here, and as Guy Poppy said, a very exciting call. My name is Kath Dalmeny, and I am the Chief Executive of Sustain, which is an alliance of food and farming organisations in civil society, not-for-profit, whatever term you like to use. I'm also a campaigner on sustainable farming and fishing issues, convener of the Sustain Brexit Forum, lucky me, as Guy said, everything could have changed while we were in here, and a commissioner for the RSA's Food Farming and Countryside Commission. That's not to give you a CV, more to give you a sense that I am well placed to connect out to a lot of different civil society organisations who may be of interest to people who are wanting to work with the sector. So I'm not here to give a pitch for Sustain, I'm here to connect out to lots of people who are working in this sector. So how we take action, and when I say we, it is this very broad alliance of about 100 organisations, and also working with hundreds more at local level. So just to give you a flavour of the sorts of things they work on, farming, fisheries, biodiversity, standards, food, animal welfare, skills, schools, education, health, international development, international trade, and the way that all of those things interrelate is through food and through sustainability, health, fairness. Fairness being a highly technical word in an academic room, obviously. So we convene hundreds of people and organisations. If you can't see the picture from here, great gathering in January in the Oxford Real Farming Conference, where the whole sustainable farming world gets together at the same time as the Oxford Farming Conference. The connection of the names is intentional. Also with Sir Don Curry, who led the Food Farming and Countryside Commission in the early 2000s, and then Michael Gove, who was previously the DEFRA head, and now we have, of course, Teresa Villiers. So in alliance, the NGO sector gets together to run really big campaigns around issues of common concern and try to get things done. So very much a motivated sector trying to actually change the world, which seems to be coming through very much in the spirit of this funding call, which is very much to be welcomed. So I want to thank you personally for your involvement in the antibiotics work, because that One Health approach absolutely does help. That connectivity, the not pointing the finger of blame, but apportioning responsibility and seeing how things can get done. We work on the farm side of that. So there's also, we work with about 50 cities, sorry, it's 57 now, through the Sustainable Food Cities Network, which is local food partnerships, including brilliant people in Manchester, I have to say, doing lots of good stuff to improve the food system locally. So taking the food farming, sustainability, health lens and bringing it to bear on a wonderful city like Manchester to start to improve procurement, to improve the system for the food in schools. But we also are very interested as a movement, as a set of organisations, in the kind of disruptive, transformational, big ideas that can really shift things. So for example, this one here is the right to food. A lot of academics getting together with rights campaigners, with food people who are trying to tackle poverty, injustice, to say what would it be if we looked at food as being a basic human right, and what kind of services, funds, approaches would that trigger that would be able to get ourselves out of the food poverty trap as a system. And actually the finger of responsibility, when you look at it in a more One Health kind of way, tends to point to all kinds of things like housing policy and social policy, so that we're not chasing the food down the cheap food route forevermore that has such a negative implication for the whole food system, farmers, sustainability, and all those things. I can come back to that. We also, very relevant to this call, run a separate alliance with a number of other organisations called the Eating Better Alliance. That's the cloak for less but better meat. So that's very much about the climate health nexus, about how to deal with the fact that our dependence on livestock produced in an intensive way is having a very big impact. I'm not doing the kind of picture of impact on health and sustainability. Clearly that's what motivates us, but I knew that that would be being done already. So I was asked to talk about the sector itself. So in terms of this third sector, non-governmental organisations, there is a lovely bit in the call saying please work with such organisations, but I just wanted to give a bit of a pen portrait of who we are, because it's a very diverse set of organisations. I've worked with pretty much a third of the organisations in my alliance, the alliance, over my working life, and they are very different in characteristic. So I tried to draw together some facets of that kind of organisation. They're mission-driven, wanting to achieve change, so very much driven by that. Very varied in nature. In our alliance there are trade associations, accreditation bodies, think tanks, unions, political advocacy bodies, campaigning organisations, organisations that fund research at large scale, these are all household name type charities, demonstration projects, education, social enterprise, and right through to actual delivery of services. So you would have heard of a lot of the organisations in our alliance, people like the Royal Society for Protection of Birds, British Heart Foundation, World Cancer Research Fund, and also some organisations who are in this room who are doing some work at local level. Lovely Lucy Antow is here, who's doing a lot of work on food waste and social enterprise in the Northwest. And, I'm pointing at her particularly, constantly creative is another facet, and wearing multiple hats. Lucy, I'm sure you would recognise that description. Because food is so plural and touches into our lives in so many different ways, sometimes we joke in our sector that we are both a marriage guidance counsellor for all the different sectors that need to work together, and also a translation agency, because different sectors need to hear different messages with different language and with different priorities. So that is one of the things that people who get food systems, and not everybody does get it, that's another technical term, not quite sure how I'm defining that, but if people get the system's way of thinking, then that wearing multiple hats and being able to speak all the different languages of local authorities on one side, small-scale producers on another, health professionals on another, to show that there is common territory is really part of the art. And therefore, a lot of people in this sector are persuasive communicators, and also hold a lot of trust with the public. So yes, I absolutely appreciate that nobody likes being told what to do, neither do I, but we did win the sugary drinks tax campaign. Working together, we made it something that we could express concern on behalf of children, and say that if we were to liberate, shall we say, money from one part of the industry and plough it into children's health promotion, then that would make it acceptable. And we didn't use words like hypothecated, because nobody had heard of that. We talked about ring fencing and helping children. So, persuasive communicators, some of the people within our network are single issue, and others increasingly are systems based. More and more people are understanding the interconnections and seeing that there's no point solving one bit if you're going to cause a problem in another. Externalities, we call it, but actually not letting the problems bulge up somewhere else. I also have, this is another technical term, foot tapping. I came up with this last night, impatient for change. And that doesn't always match up with the research agenda, because there is a very much a driver. This mission-driven thing also comes forward with, come on, come on, come on, come on, we want to get things done. So that's a kind of campaigner's side. That's not everybody within the movement by any means, but there is certainly a characteristic of that. I also put in this phrase, which is cash poor and time poor. So a lot of people are working on shoestring, but they are doing incredible things, often at a local level, whether it be collecting surplus food to try and help fix downstream problems with food poverty, or trying to draw up land use strategies at midnight, just before meeting with Michael Gove. If you're mission driven, you end up doing a lot of things on the fly, but it partly the connectivity with other people, and I encourage people to become connected with this sector if you're not already, is incredibly important, because actually it can move fast because it knows people. And multiply beholden. This is something that's quite interesting if you're wanting to work in partnership with organisations who are multiply beholden. I'm sure universities are as well, but to beneficiaries, charitable purposes, charity law, the Lobbying Act, partners, trustees, funders, it's just worth understanding the culture of organisations if you're wanting to work together. I also wanted to reflect a little on the way the third sector, civil society, operates. And again, it's a very broad brush, because there's such different organisations in these sectors. But one of the things I think that everybody's quite proud of is this idea of maintaining a common purpose, even when governments, Brexits, whatever it is changing all around you. The common purpose of children's health, healthy school meals, good food education has not changed, basically. It might have changed in colour or tone, or the way we express it, or exactly what we focus on at different times. But the fact that we need sustainable fisheries, sustainable farming that looks after the soil and the health of people has not fundamentally changed. Providing, demonstrating, I don't want to just read the list, I'll leave this with you, but all kinds of very active, there's a lot of verbs in here which are about doing, wanting to urge the world to change. Creating compelling narratives, drafting the legislation sometimes on behalf of policymakers, because sometimes the NGOs may be in connection with very motivated lawyers, very motivated civil servants who want to also be part of that. And that's one of the wonderful things about working in Alliance. Actually, you find the people who want to do stuff. And what was the lovely phrase you had from Richard Olivier? The flame.
Call to the imagination.
The call to the imagination. I sometimes see little flames going off in organisations when we talk about food, which is rather wonderful. It is exactly that, the imagination going, we can do something about this. We can also be the long memory across government changes, Brexit changes, and we can join up get people heard. And then I had some fun with some verbs down here. I thought that we convene, inform, support, praise. Oh yes, but we also critique, cajole, embarrass, expose, escalate and nag. Because there is an element that also there's something about holding to account. We're not always right, but we're always out there trying to push for things. So in collaboration also we need to be moderating the way we move forward, accepting One Health approaches, helping to navigate. I don't like to steer, I think we are navigating together. So looking at this wonderful food system diagram, I hope my friend Dr. Kelly Parsons won't mind. She helped write this diagram at the City University, but I'm going to adapt it for my uses. So this is her diagram of the food system, wonderfully complex and interrelated, just like your three-dimensional diagrams, but I can't help but simplify. So the food system through a civil society lens, sorry Kelly, is politics, health, environment, society, economy. Absolutely, we've talked about these kind of things many times. But through a civil society lens, the politics is about how we put purpose, duties, powers and finance into the solutions. The health bit is about achieving that healthy, safe, high quality, tasty food. It's about achieving agroecology, and I've put in brackets all the other terms that people like to use for agroecology: regenerative, sustainable, circular, organic, and I've gone also sustainable fish because it always gets lost. But the sustainable production side the guy talked about. In society, that it is supported, celebrated, taught, sustained. I was going to put loved, and then I thought it wasn't a very academic word, so I took it out again, but I do mean it. And the economy, I'm very influenced by Kate Raworth of Donut Economics, distributive, regenerative economics, that actually puts the onus on the money to work for us rather than against us. And then you could put all kinds of things in the middle. I don't want to dictate what's in the middle for the civil society, because there's lots of different answers to that. But I suggest that everything that we do from here on in as a species ought to be moving towards that middle circle. Because it's about disruptive solutions like the right to food, which brings in all of the other circles. It says, how do we I sometimes see this as a flower, and sometimes I see it as one of those wobble boards. Partly because I broke my ankle recently, so I have to stand on it quite often. But there's a sense of having to do that balancing act all the time in policy. Where are we bringing in fiscal measures? Where are we retreating from regulation? Where are we actually going to regulate and ban something? Where are we going to let that just flower and see how it goes? So I think that's part of the job of policy these days, is to do the balancing. But the right to food framework, when you actually get to it, it's not just about the accessibility of food for people on a low income. It's also about forcing policymakers to have to be in the same room on the same wobble board, doing the balancing factors. If you can't afford food because your housing price is too high, does the food system have to keep on pushing down the price of the food and being bad to the farming community in order to achieve cheap, affordable food? Or do we have to also address the housing costs? Well, of course we do. We have to balance the factors that make people in a low-income situation. So in the centre I put farming and environment standards, subsidies, law. That is all up for grabs at the moment, and you very rightly signalled the agriculture bill. Unfortunately, we have not yet won the argument that public health should be a public good. And that would be wonderful as a piece of work to say, what are the barriers to that? Who is it within Treasury who is resisting that? What is it that would persuade them? How should it be framed in a way that would be acceptable? It's terribly important, and all our health members are terribly interested in that. And another way of looking at, just to bring to life the idea of being on that wobble board and saying what's something that really works for many different sectors, the whole less and better meat and more fruit and veg, more plant-based, less reliance on livestock. Not about vegetarianism or veganism, but they're getting the balance right, or rebalancing the system towards a better system that is also agroecological, so the meat and dairy that we do eat comes from systems that are regenerative, sustainable, are cultivating soil and carbon sequestration. This is the space that our generation has to operate in. So I'll take out again the actual detail of that, because lots of people have different answers in that middle circle, so it's not for me to dictate that. But there are certainly common territories within the whole alliance, and they're not unfamiliar in this room by any means. I keep on reading everybody's papers on these things, and we're all coming back to the similar things, which is very heartening, because that means we can get together and fix it. Each category of thing will have a different type of barrier, whether it's social norming, economic, whatever it is, but what fun it will be to work together to fix those things. Don't let me read all of this out to you. I hate it when people put up slides like this, so I do apologise doing it to you. I want to leave it with you. So I did a bit of research in lead up to this, having talked to Flora, having talked to the organisers of this. I thought, well, what does a set of people within our alliance think would be useful research questions? It's very rare that people will come to the third sector first before designing a research question. we normally come in a bit later and help out with delivery or something. So I tried to turn it the other way around. I asked some people in our alliance, what do you think? I'm very happy to share all the slides, by the way. I might just pick out a couple of them. So that a lot of them are about being in that middle of the circle. So I asked n number of, I can't even remember how many NGOs I asked. I asked about 30, and I got about 15 to 20 responses back. So I just sorted through some commonalities there. So these aren't meant to be a representation of the whole sector. We'd have to do better consultation for that. But a lot of it was about how do we get into that middle circle in the flower? How do we overcome the barriers to making the solutions happen? How do we get the right evidence and evaluation of those solutions now with communities who are actually enacting it? How do we work with the practitioners, the sustainable farmers, the sustainable fishers and their sectors? How do we produce food and public goods from farming and land use, just like you were mentioning? And what's the role of public subsidies and R&D investment in driving that change? What is it actually that drives change? How do we make the kind of tech that is coming forward? Everywhere we turn, drones are going to fix it, aren't they? This is all in the news at the moment. Well, they might well do. They might have some role in that. But which kind of farming and fishery innovation and tech is affordable and accessible so that most farmers and fishers can use it, and that it's actually in a way that they can own the product of that? What kind of trading models would support the right kind of farming and land use that would also support health? How can we prioritise fruit and veg? How can we make it so we've got a skilled population who can actually handle fresh produce that is healthier when it gets to them? All of these things are about joining up, and they're really good fun to be involved in. The kind of practitioners who work on this kind of stuff are fantastic. There's another of them in the room, organic farmers and growers here, who are people who are really trying to make the solutions happen on the ground, literally in the soil. And I'm particularly interested in this at the moment, which is city and area-based food and farming and planning policy to drive change. So somewhere like Manchester has an enormous population of people eating, an enormous population of people who are eating in public sector institutions, for example, in hospitals, in schools, in care homes. Well, every single government strategy that has ever come out has said, do something about public procurement. Well, can we do it this time? That would be great. We've got all the tools in the box. We don't actually have to design any more standards. The standards that are there are pretty good, but we have to make them happen and help institutions to do so. And a lot of this is about learning and sharing the knowledge and making sure it happens and enabling, making it an enabling environment and changing a culture, an institutional culture. So I am very interested in behaviour change, and I know that many of our members are as well, but I'm going to underline not individualistic, very much, and I noticed this in the call, this has got very much a tone of this, more about institutional and cultural, social norming this stuff, so it becomes normal for us to think that sugary drinks aren't something for children's lives, that it becomes normal to think that there's fruit and veg in everybody's lives and it comes from a farm we've connected with in some way, that it becomes normal to talk about where stuff comes from and that it hasn't beaten up on the soil and the birds on the way through. There were also lots of detail from civil society. I just dived down into one of the petals of the flower. Again, I won't read it all out, but it was very much about, I asked about agroecology. So I went down into that bottom, the environmental and farming part of the flower, and I said, what is it your sector is very keen on? And again, my colleague from the Organic and Farmers and Growers are one of the people who contributed to this. But it's something about, this is synthesising from several people, but redefining productivity was a big one. At the moment we measure on a very basic economic model of inputs and outputs, and it does not take into account the impact on water, soil, people, health and all those things. And there's a lovely line, I think, in the call about how do we get better quality nutrients from the soil and more nutrients rather than a sort of bald calorific measure of what is success. And actually, farmers don't even really measure on calories, they measure on a measure of economic value, totally understandably, but we are trying to shift that in the agriculture bill and in the post-Brexit or post-stay-in or whatever we do, agriculture policy that would say, be rewarded for the things that matter. And the things that matter are the middle of that flower now. So also lots of interest in an integrated land use policy. Sounds like a very posh grown-up phrase. What it actually means is balancing the needs of all of these things. Once again, the wobble board, once it comes to deciding what to do with land, agroecological food production, renewable energy, afforestation, carbon sequestration, rewilding, fuel and fibre, flood management, these are all now competing needs for our land. And I often, like when I came up on the train, I went past several fields full of solar panels. And it always makes me slightly sad, because what was on that field before was very good solar panels in the form of leaves that we were eating. And so we have displaced some form of production with another form of production. And it's one of those balancing acts. My husband works in renewable energy, so we're constantly having fights about this. What's more important, a cabbage leaf or a solar panel? You should come to dinner. It's so much fun. If you are actually invited. But it's just that those kind of balancing acts will be having to be happening at local authority level when people decide about their own land use strategies, at national level when we think about what is the priority for our land. And those are the kinds of things that we need to step into. Are we going to grow more fruit and vegetables, or are we going to import more of them? And what will that mean for poorer populations? Will that make them more expensive or more affordable? All sorts of interesting conversations that should be happening. I think there was a very strong message as well about evaluating the routes and barriers to phasing out the more damaging practices. So that would be things like some of the more intensive livestock production techniques that lead to prophylactic use of farm antibiotics, for example. Some forms of pesticide use, not all pesticides are bad, but some are very bad. Grain-based animal feed, we really should be moving away from feeding grain to animals. It's terribly bad. What about feeding waste to animals like we used to do when I was a kid, for example? You can tell I care about that. It is absolutely scandalous that we feed grain to pigs. Full stop. I won't go on. I will go on, but somewhere else. But this general philosophical thing of how do we move away from extractive economics, business models and farming, and towards more regenerative forms, and all the time thinking about how we are building community, building food systems that work for everybody. And I'm going to finish, actually I'll finish on that one, but I'll finish on some cautionary notes. Also in my responses, and I've anonymised these, was some quotes from people about their normal relationship with the research agenda. So this is the third sector reporting back some complications with working with this kind of fund. So we've not been able, this is from a farming association who is right on the front line of doing sustainability accreditation. So they are somebody who thinks a lot about how to achieve all of these things. And they said we've not been able to send someone to the meeting as we have lots of activities, talks and farmer trainings that we do at this time of year, and so are tied up. And whenever we signed up to go to these sorts of events, we're excluded as we're not a research centre, and so we are ineligible. I know they're not in this case, but they didn't even look at this call because they thought they would be. So there's a sense of a non-inclusion because of maybe being a trade body or whatever. Another one in the top corner, I have in the past been extremely frustrated when such funding pots have just allowed academics to pursue extremely narrow interventions in the name of sustainability. I'm not me saying that, just reporting back. Another one, which I think I share this one, I fear we'll get loads of calls and emails at the very last minute before the submission deadline, asking us as a civil society group to partner on bids, usually for no money, even to cover staff time, and as a passive recipient of an already fully decided research agenda. Apologies, that will happen to me in the next few weeks. And this is a really nice one from a colleague who is very ingrained in solutions. That's great that they have invited NGOs in at this early stage. Usually civil society is an afterthought, so a good sign. Great, I'll wave the good sign. And I just wanted to finish on a lovely picture of a system at work. This is a £750,000 organic veg box scheme that I'm a voluntary trustee of in Hackney, in East London. And the woman who runs it, Julie Brown, is an absolute diamond. She has been working for the last 20 years to make a £750,000 fruit and veg business work for soil, farmers, incomes, fairness, supply chain, low carbon, zero waste, well virtually zero, they throw about 2 pumpkins away a week, and they give everything else to a homeless shelter. It also works seasonally, it's got a food buying policy that's been worked through in terms of making it work for everything, because she's a passionate pioneer of a better way of doing things. And I wanted to use that as an illustration of what wonderful people there are in this sector, full of solutions, full of passion for doing good things, and I think one of our jobs is probably making them come to the fore. Julie probably wouldn't have a lot of time to get involved in research, but there are friends of hers, she can probably benefit from something that is well designed that would help her kind of solution come to the fore. And it is low tech, it is community based, it's connected. It's not going to feed the whole world, but it could feed, say, 5 or 10% of our population, and that would make an enormous difference to organic production in this country that would help with wildlife corridors, soil conservation, water quality, climate change, and all sorts of things. So if we start picking off the pieces bit by bit, and then my goodness, there are some really passionate people willing to do so, I think we really can change the world. So here's to your Shakespearean stimulus there. Thank you very much.